Hi everyone. Um, Welcome to today's class. So like I said, in today's class, what we're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking at all the labs. I might not be able to actually look at everything or fix it all, or work on everything, but at least let's touch base on some of them. I will be explaining some of these ones. I think we started working on the lab during the class where we were able to complete the lab 1, 2, maybe 4, 5, but we'll just we'll just do a quick recap on the labs, then also the ones that we've not even touched at all. So I'll start from lab 01, from the managed identities, just to refresh our brain, so we'll see how things look like. How do we work on some of these things? And I can actually assure you that the content within these labs, kind of related to what you'll be doing in your day to day. Normally, as a cloud engineer, you're going to be managing identities, which is for sure. You're going to be creating users, you're going to be creating groups, creating UMI, which is user assigned identity, manage system assigned manage identity. You're going to be looking at how to authenticate with all this. And this is what the lab 01 talks about. The lab 02 talks about 2A, talks about how you can actually manage subscriptions, how you can actually manage roles. Also, you are leveraging Outback, and this is something very important when you work with identities. There's nothing you are assigning roles to aside identities. So identities are the object that you assign roles to. TJ.
I'm sorry, you're not sharing your screen yet, right? We can't see your screen.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
Hello, if you can hear us, we can see your
Okay, give me a
screen. I
minute,
thought
please.
Yeah, we
I
can
think
see.
we are trying to share your screen.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Yep. Mm, okay, thanks. I think I was only sharing online. So you can see it now, I believe. Okay, lovely. Okay, so like I was saying, we look at the lab 01 where we talked about identities. Then the lab 02, where we'll talk about how to manage subscription and Outback. Lab 3, lab 02B, still under, governance management. We'll look at a lot of things. But for this specifically, we are going to be looking at Azure policy. How do we manage, resource compliance within the organization? And I can tell you that, the lab 01, 2A, 2B, most of the stuffs, you'll be doing as a cloud engineer, especially, when you work in an organization where your role is just to manage identities or manage um assignments, roles, and the like. You might be doing this in a different way, maybe leveraging PIM and the like, but at least you're still going to be managing roles that are assigned to all these identities, be it enter ID roles or the subscription roles. Then the three, which is the lab 3A, where we talk about how do we manage resources. In this particular lab, we're going to be looking at how you can actually manage Azure resources by leveraging ARM templates. So at the end of the day, we'll be looking at other tools also, like Terraform, Tofu, and the likes. But at the end, the end goal is how do we manage our resources, by not just manually creating them. Then the lab 4 talks about how do we implement virtual networking. In this class, we've talked about virtual network. We'll talk about some of the prerequisites when you want to create a network. What are some of the things you need to put into consideration? Do you want to pair these networks? If you create multiple networks, so what are things you are going to be doing? What are things you are going to be avoiding? So sure, everybody understand that you do not want to create different network with the same IP address range, because at the end of the day, you will not be able to pair them. So we'll look at this, and managing virtual network is one of the first things you should do when you create a new environment, because you just don't want to put things out there, and at the end of the day, when you start associating your resources to all these networks, then you will not be able to pair the network when the need arises. So that's something we're going to be looking at. Then the lab 5, I was just talking about how do you pair a network. So yeah, we're going to be looking at inter-site connectivity, not just pairing now. How do we extend our network to our on-premises environment? Then we'll be looking at VPN. We'll be looking at the site-to-site, the point-to-site, and a little of express.route, I believe. Then the lab 6 talks about the network traffic management. Yes, I've been able to create my VPN, the point-to-site VPN, but I'm still not able to connect to the database, within my Azure environment. I'm still getting that connectivity error. So how do I work on this? For me to be able to work on it, I need some logs. I need to be able to view, get something that can actually help me in troubleshooting. And that's where the network traffic management comes in. Then the lab 7 talks about how to manage storage. We've talked about different kind of storage. We've talked about the tier, at least for the ones that we've talked about, you understand that, okay, if we are to store unstructured data, then we are looking at Azure Blob. Some other ones are the table, the queue, or even the file share, depending on the use case. Then we moved on from there to talk about virtual machines. We talked about virtual machines. We talked about some other compute options like the VMSS. So how do we manage virtual machine? Well, that is what we're going to be looking at in the lab 8. The lab 9A are other compute options. Now, at the end of the day, one of the major goals is to be able to, okay. At the end of the day, one of the major goals is to be able to deploy our application, and this one of the things we're going to be looking at when we get to the DevOps class. So we are going to be looking at what are some of the options available to us. Web app within the Azure environment is one of the options. I'm so sure we talked about the app service. We talked about the app service plan and how you can actually, create multiple web apps within the app service plan, depending on the kind of plan that you choose. Then we moved away from there. We talked about container instance, container apps, and we're going to be diving into that when we get to the lab 9. The lab 9B and C, actually give justice to that. Then the lab 10 talks about the data protection. Now, we talked about the business continuity center, which was once named the backup center. Now, how do we protect our data? How do we make sure that data stored on virtual machines on the disks are actually being backed up, so that whenever we need them or whenever the need arises, we can actually restore from them if need be. Then the last one will be the monitoring aspect. We talked about the Azure Monitor. We looked at, what are some of the things that we use when it comes to, or let's say, where do we get all those data from, when it comes to monitoring? What are some of the things that we can actually monitor? the tenant, the subscription. We looked at different objects that we can actually monitor. So what are the main components when it comes to this monitor? We talk about the metrics, we talk about the logs, where I was able to explain that, when you leverage the metrics, you are looking at numerical values that you can actually visualize. The logs are aggregate of, these values, but they are not something you can actually visualize, but at least it gives you, you can still, if you want to leverage, maybe you want to push this log maybe to the Power BI, so that you can actually create a dashboard also and the likes. But at least they are not numerical values, but they are collections of, data that gives you that leverage when it comes to troubleshooting. So these are all the stuff we are going to be looking at. So let's start. Like I said, a quick recap by going to the lab 01. I'm not going to be doing those ones. I think we've done the lab 1 to 4 or so. I'm just going to quickly glance through, and then we move on to what we have. Or let me just I'll just go one after the other. But very soon, I think in the coming weeks, I'm going to be having everything within my YouTube channel. The lab 1 to 3 currently, I believe that earlier on my YouTube channel. So in case you're doing any of these things and you get stuck somewhere, you can actually take a look at it there. I would also try to complete the other ones. I know I've recorded a lot of them, but I've not just pushed them to my YouTube channel. So I will try as much as possible to do that in the coming days, so that when you're going through these labs, you can actually see, just the same way we have for the fundamentals. You can actually see what you're missing, why you are not able to complete any of these labs. So I've actually explained this one here, which is the lab 01, how to manage Microsoft Entra identities. So the first thing here says, looking at the lab scenario, I'm just going to be looking at the architectural diagram, and I will tell you what needs to be done. The architectural diagram says, the tax one here says there should be a user one. The name should be user one, and the title should be IT lab administrator. This user, from what I can see here, needs to be a local account. So it's an account you need to create within your tenant. Then there should be another user, which is going to be an invited user, a guest user definitely, to that tenant. And it needs to have the same job title. These two guys needs to be added to, you can see the icon, needs to be added to the group called IT Lab Administrator, which is going to be the tax 2. So you can see the tax 1 here says create and configure user accounts, and tax 2 says create group and add member. So I'm going to, let's just, wherever we are able to stop today. So let's just start looking at it. So I'm going to share my screen into two. I was trying to do. Did I push that out? It's always difficult to share this guy. Just give me a minute. Come on. This guy doesn't want to. Okay. He's looking at the other one. Okay, I know what to do. Okay. Got so many screens at once, so that's why. Oh my. Come on. Oh my. Is this not magic? Oh my. Okay, so I'm just going to just give me a minute. Okay. I'm so sorry. I've got so many screens, so we're just trying to pull to a different screen. Okay. I know what to do. Okay, finally, man. Okay, so I believe you can still see this clearly. So here we've got the first one that says create and configure user account, and the task 2 should be, to create groups and add members. So the first thing I need to do is just to go to the Enter ID site. So here it tells you what to do. Log into the portal.azure.com, which I've done already. And this is based on the fact that if this is the first time you actually log into that portal, you're going to get like a notification saying you can go to the Quick Start Center, just for you to have a basic understanding of how Azure works. Then you need to search and select the Enter ID, which is where we're going to be. Because here, the main thing we are going to be doing here is to manage Enter ID identities. So we are now managing subscriptions, we are now managing resources, we are managing Enter ID identity. So we need to go to the identity part, which is the Microsoft Enter ID part. So I'm not going to search because I know I've got that particular feature as part of my favorite. So I'll just go to the Microsoft Enter ID part. I'm so sure I've got this user created, but we can do it we can do it all over again. So take a few minutes to familiarize yourself with some of the features. Yeah. So here you've got so many things you can actually see when it comes to the portal. This is my test tenant, and you can see the name, the tenant ID, the primary domain. I've got under the manager, you can see users, groups, external identities. When you invite users to your tenant, this is where you manage them from. Roles and administration, these are Enter ID roles. And when we talk about Enter ID roles, we're talking about roles that you use in managing your identity. It's not the roles you use in managing subscriptions. Some of the time people come, when I used to work for Microsoft support, one of the Microsoft support organization, these are typical tickets that we get. People tell, they will raise a ticket saying, I've got global admin within a tenant. Why am I not able to deploy a virtual machine? That's two different things. Deploying a virtual machine doesn't require you to be a global admin within the tenant. All you need to be is to have, or all you need, is to have at least a role that will allow you deploy that specific resource you're trying to deploy. So if let's say a virtual machine administrator, yes, I should be able to do, to deploy a virtual machine. I can get some other rules also, but those rules are related to the subscription and not the Enter ID rules. So when you talk about the Enter ID rules, we are talking about rules that you need to manage identities, not only identities though, because some of the things you need to manage the tenant, I will just put it that way, because there are some rules like the conditional access. Yes, it's still you managing access, to the tenant. So those rules are not related to resources within internet, but you can actually use it. At the end of the day, both the Enter ID rules and also the subscription rules are targeted towards identities that we have within the tenant. So we still come back to the identity. The identity can be user accounts. The identity can be managed identities like user assigned identity or even system assigned. The identity might be a service principal, which we all know as our application registration within our own application within our tenant. So it all depends on the kind of identity you're working with. So external IDs, roles, administrative unit. Now, when we talk about the administrative unit, let's talk about let's say you have different departments within the organization. And instead of assigning a role to someone within the tenant so that the person can actually manage everything within a tenant, what you're trying to do is you want to assign a role to someone based on their department. You want them to be able to manage identities within their department, so they can manage the groups. So if I create an administrative role for marketing department and I assign someone, the top tier permission on that particular administrative unit, that person will be able to manage identities within that particular administrative unit, be it the group or the user account. You cannot manage applications within the administrative unit. You just need to know that. But you can actually manage users, groups within that particular unit. So if I assign anyone permission on this finance administrative unit, that same person would not be able to see what's going on within the IT unit, except if I actually assign a role to the person again on that IT administrative unit. So this is actually a way to segregate, users depending on depending on the department or the unit they are. I think one of the reasons why Microsoft created this, before now, I've seen people create different tenants just to be able to segregate those departments. But if you create different tenants, that means you are creating different organizations. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit or suit what you are trying to accomplish. So it's always better when you have an administrative unit created. Enterprise application, devices, app registrations, identity governance, where we're going to be looking at some of things like access reviews and the likes. It all depends on the kind of license within your tenant. So application policy, these are just some of the things you can actually manage here. Let's say you want to connect your on-premises, you want to have an hybrid environment, then you need to have this Microsoft Enter ID Connect. This is just like an agent that you will have installed on your server, where you're actually managing, let's say you still have an on-premises server and you want to create an hybrid environment. Custom domain tells you what are the domains that have been verified within your account. Now, before you can start using a domain within this account, before you can start creating users with a specific custom domain, you need to have verified that particular domain. But an initial domain, while creating a tenant which has been assigned to that your organization, will also be there as available. You can see this is my initial domain. So when I created my organization, I created it with an email that ended with it360.com. So what Microsoft is going to do is going to create, like an initial domain from that particular domain name attached to your user account. So, and that's why I've got it360ng.onmicrosoft.com, which is the initial domain. But it doesn't make any sense if I start creating my users and I start creating them with, babafemi.bulugbe at it360ng.onmicrosoft.com. It might not really suit, so it's better to verify, or to add custom domains that I can actually use. And that's why I've added, it360ng as a custom domain. And you can see some other ones. I think, it was when we were going through these classes, if I try to verify google.com, it doesn't belong to me. Yes, I can add it, but I won't be able to verify it. So for every domain that you want to use, you need to be able to verify. And how do we verify? You need to have access to that domain name. That means you need to be the one managing that domain name. And that's the only way you can actually verify, because you are going to be adding, we talked about DNS records. We talk about different DNS records where we talk about TST, we talk about, MS and some other ones, So here is where you are going to, A record, and the likes. So this is where you are going to be managing, or where that is going to come in. So for me to be able to verify, let's say this bricks.tv.com, I need to add a TST record or an MX record to say, this this particular stuff belongs to me. And how do I verify? I need to log into the website where I've got these, or domain registry where I've got this domain from, and within that particular domain I'll be able to verify that this domain actually belongs to me. If not, I will not be able to use it. Some of the time your domain might have been verified in another tenant. So how do we do that? And how does it even get to that? I did not verify my domain. How did my domain get verified in another tenant? Let's say I'm trying to verify this domain, and all I can see is domain verified in another tenant. That means there is a problem. Some of the time, what has happened, in the past, from my own experience, let's say this particular organization, IT3CTNG, is not on Azure. We are using AWS. And someone from my organization, which I've got the email, maybe one Babafemi one Babafemi has got my email. I've got or let's say one Femi has got email. We've created an email with IT3CTNG for him. And he went to pick maybe Microsoft Teams. Maybe one of the Saturday he wanted to have a meeting with some of his friends, and they say, "Oh, let's meet on Teams." He now used the company's email, to pick up Teams license. What that is going to do is going to have a tenant created for him, and what is going to do is to verify that particular domain. So when the IT360 now wants to sign up for Azure, they will not get that particular error saying this domain has been verified. So you can look at what we call the domain takeover. So it's one of the regular issue that we get, back when I was with Microsoft support. So you need to do what we call a domain takeover, where you take that domain over from that particular person. So but we can look at that later. It's not part of this. I'll just explain it. So your .microsoft initially will be your primary domain, but when you verify other custom domain, you can now add them as the primary domain. You can add them as primary domain. So what again? Yeah. So password reset, company branding, all these things. If you want to change the look and feel of the organization, maybe when someone tries to sign in, you want them to get that particular feel that they're actually accessing your tenant, then you can actually create the company branding from here. I will show you. So let's say I want to sign into my tenant. You can see, yeah, it doesn't show that I'm actually going to my tenant. But once I type in my email address, IT360NG, it tells me, okay, so this was one of the scenario I was actually explaining the other time. Let's say, I have used my company's email to take, like a Microsoft license, and it has created a personal account for me. At the point in time when my organization finally comes to Azure, they'll still create an email for me. And here now, they've created an email just like the one I have, before we even got to Azure. So that means I'm going to be having two accounts associated with that particular email address. So in this case, some of the time when you're not using an incognito tab, when you're logging with your normal browser, it might just log you automatically to the last one you've logged into. So most of the time, people might have been logged into their personal accounts. The organization is going to be different from this one, right? That means whatever resource you've created in here, whatever identities you are managing in here, you will not be able to see them here because they are different organizations. So you need to always check, which organization you are signing to when you're having issue. So in this case, I want to log into the organization with my company, which my IT, with my email, which my IT department has created for me. So I click on this one. Once I click on that, you can see there is something different there. I've got the organization logo, and the background shows QuickBook payments. If I go back and I pick the personnel, you would see that it's going to be a different feel, because here we've not configured anything for that particular organization. And this takes me to live.ng. You can see when you log into the personnel, it takes me to login.live. But when I try logging into the company's own, it doesn't take me to live. Live, anytime you see anything login.live, that means you are logging in to a personal account. So you can actually know which account you're actually logging in, to, when just by looking at the URL also. So you can see once I'm going into my work account, it's still login.microsoftonline.com. It's not login.live in this case. So when you try to log in, when Azure tries to redirect you to login.live, just know that you are logging in with a personal account. So that's that about the company branding and the like. So like I said, I'm not going to be creating this user, something I've done before. So in this particular lab, all you need to do is to create those users, then invite the other user. How do we create those users? Go to the user blade. From here, you can actually see from this drop down. Just hold on, it's still loading. From this drop down, you can see the option to create new user or invite new user. Now you are trying to create, and you have something like this graded out. So for now, I'm so sure it's my own browser. But some of the time you might have that's you might get this same issue. Just know that you might not have the adequate permission to be able to perform that operation. What's going on? I'm confused. Why am I not able to? Just hold on. Let me see where I'm logging with. Is this thing playing with me? So I'm so sure this thing is playing with me, but I will check. But so for you to be able to create new user or to invite any external user to this your tenant, you need to have adequate permission. And the least permission you will have to create a new user is to have the user admin. Though when you've got other permissions like helpdesk, you might not be able to create a new user, but you'll be able to manage those users. Maybe their password, change some of the things and the likes. Invited user, to invite a new user to the tenant, some of the time, depending on the settings within your organization, some organizations have blocked users without adequate permission to be able to invite users to the tenant. But by default, all users can actually invite users to the tenant. So it depends on the settings. I will show you the settings I'm talking about. So if I go back to enter ID and I go to the external identities, just like I've said the other time. Now I click on the external collaboration settings. This is where I can actually restrict users from inviting other users to my tenant. Now this one says who can actually invite user, and I'm saying, oh, this is guest users have the same as no, this that's not the one. This is the one that says who can actually invite. Now I'm saying anyone in the organization can invite user, including guest. and non-admin. So that means anyone from this organization can go ahead to invite a new user to my tenant. But what if I just want to, we've been seeing a lot of gmail.com, yahoo.com within my organization. And, why should that be? So I just want to restrict this to maybe admins or people that have been assigned specific roles, to be able to invite users. So I can come here to change that settings depending on what actually suits. Here, this one talks about when I invite a user to my tenant. Yes, he's a guest user, he's an external user. What can this user do within the tenant? What can this user do within the tenant? Should this user have the same role? Should he be able to do almost the same thing a user account within my tenant with no permission can actually do? Yes. Then I would have this option set. Some of the time, I don't know if you have noticed, when you invite a user to your tenant and the user is not able to see anything within the Microsoft Entra, it gets that error saying, unauthorized. But a user account we created within that particular tenant without any permission can actually see those things like users within it, like the Microsoft Entra ID blade. That means there has been a certain error. This has been changed. So these are things we just look at while we are still here. I'll just look at some of the other settings there. So we talked about how to enable users to get into our tenant. Now we are talking about how to invite user. Do I want to do this manually every time? No. I can go ahead to set up what we call the self-service sign up. I want users to be able to come into my tenant without me inviting them. All I need to do is to give them a link to an application that will take them into that my tenant. So you need to create an application and they can go in from there, sign in from there. So I think I've got a video on my YouTube that talks about how to leverage self-service sign up, where you are able to allow guest users to come into your tenant. But the question here will be, if you send out a link, can that person send the link to someone else and that person will get access to the tenant? Yes, everyone can actually use it, but there is still a control I can actually put in place. I will still be the one to accept, or to check an option to allow that user to come into my tenant. Even when that user has tried to sign up, I can still deny access, to that user, or even allow that user to come in, into that tenant. So there is still some checks that can actually still be put in place, if you are actually leveraging the self-service sign up. Says, do you want to allow users to be able to remove themselves from organization? Users should be able to leave organization when they want. Maybe a user is having an error and I do not want to be the one to come and remove the user. Users should have the right to also remove themselves, so you can actually do that setting there. The last settings here talks about what's the collaboration setting. Now, I talked about the fact that when users within the organization, are given permission to be able to invite users or even guest users within my organization. Let's now take a look at my organization, and I noticed a lot of users are in the organization which should not be there. Most of them having their Gmail, accounts within my organization, their Yahoo account within my organization. I can come here to say I would only allow invitation from specific domains, from specific domains. Only people from Microsoft.com domain should be able to get into my tenant, So if I set this, if you try to invite anyone from Gmail account, you would not be able to, even when you have all the permission. So I can actually restrict them from there. I can also say, okay, I want to allow every organization or every domain users to be able to be invited to this my tenant, except users from this specific domain, Gmail, Yahoo Mail, and the likes. So all depends on where we're still talking about these. There are a lot of things you can actually take a look at. Yeah, life cycle management of how long do you want users to be within the tenant before their access is reviewed. But I will not be able to show you this because I don't have the what's it again, the license required. So that's why I'm getting an error saying I do not have access. It's not as if I'm not an administrator, but I don't have the specific license. When you want to leverage access review, then you are looking at having P2, premium P2 within the tenant. So let me take you back to users. There are some settings you need to understand also when it comes to users. So I'll just go to the user settings. Some of the settings we talked about within the guest user, you're still going to see them here. But it's the other one we talked about was more attributed to guest users, but this is for all users here. Now here, user can register application. The understanding here is even when you do not have permissions, even when you have not been assigned an application administrator role within a tenant, can you create application? Yes, that's what this is saying. But if I want users, only users that have been assigned the specific permission to be able to do this, then I'll turn this off. Then users without permission will not be able to. Restrict non-admin users from creating tenants. This is a very good one. You want to set this to yes. This is because why do you want to create a tenant for my tenant? I will show you where you can actually create a tenant. So it's always nice when you restrict non-users to be from creating tenant from your organization. So it's just like you creating an organization from my own organization. Users can create security group. Now, when you hear anything or when you see anything that says users can, they're talking about even users without admin permission. Users that's and you can see here. That means if I pick this particular, now this talks about users created within my tenant, right? But if I pick this particular option that says guest users should have the same access as members, that means even guest users will be able to create applications within my tenant. They will be able to create security group within my tenant. So you need to check all these options, to be sure of what you're actually doing. So most times, you want to have this remediated. You just don't want anyone within the organization because they have been invited to be able to do all this. So you can actually restrict this from here. This one, restrict access to your enter ID, and that's why if I restrict this, users without admin permission, when they even try to go to the enter ID center, they will not be able to. So it actually negates everything here. So because how will you even get there? You cannot even, you cannot even get there to create an application. So if I turn this on, it will negate, you will not even be able to get to where you're going to be able to create an application. So if I restrict access, so when it talks about restricting access, it is not talking about restricting access to admin users. It's talking about just users within the organization that have got no permission within the organization. Can user link their LinkedIn account to your tenant? You want to have it there. Should they be able to? Fine. Should they not be able to? You can actually set it up from here. Do you want users to be signed in? You want to keep your users signed in. You want to that specific session, you want to keep it going, you want to keep it rolling. You can say, oh no, I do not want the users to be signing for a long time. Anytime maybe they've been away from your system for a long time, when they try to authenticate, you should not keep them signing. They should be forced to re-authenticate. So you can set this from here, but not really sure this really works though, but at least you can set this from here. Then if I click on this guy, it takes me back to the external users settings, the guest account settings that we talked about the other time. So, but I'm going to go back. I just just clicking that just for you to see that you can actually go to that particular settings, to that particular blade from here also. The last one here is what are some of the features that you want. Users can preview features within my apps. This one, you might not really know have more knowledge about this guy, but if you are invited to a new tenant, you would see that when you accept the invitation, it doesn't take you to the Azure part. It takes you to a different web app where you would see some applications. Let me tell. I don't know why I'm not able to. What's going on with mine? Let's see if I try to invite a new user. Let's see if that works now. I don't know why it's not working, but let's see what's going on. What is going on here? Why am I not able to? Okay, let me see one of those guest users within my tenant. And let's see. Okay. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, I'm not gonna see it here. So the apps, my apps is just, what are the applications that that specific user will have access to, so you can actually see it from the my apps. So let's continue with this guy. So now that we understand, how those settings might affect users within the tenant, and also how your role permission can actually affect you to be able to invite users to this tenant, or be able to create a new tenant, a new user within this specific tenant. So you can actually see all that from there. The same thing goes with the groups. Almost the we talked about some of the settings when it comes to users. The groups have got their own settings also. So when you are creating a group, there are two different types of groups here you can create within the Enter ID. Now, you can actually create a security group or a Microsoft 365 group. Now, when you talk about this Microsoft 365 group, if I try to create a Microsoft 365 group, it's going to come with, email associated with that particular group, as against the security group. One very funny thing about this thing is, let's see, we talked about the fact that when you create a user or when you create a group and you delete that user from that particular tenant, the user stays in the tenant for 30 days. Also, when you delete a group from the tenant, it stays in this deleted group, blade for 30 days. However, it only applies to Microsoft 365 group. If you delete a security group, it's going to be deleted immediately. It doesn't go in there for 30 days. So anytime you want to delete, a group, be sure that, you are deleting the right group. Do never delete a security group if that is not what you're trying to do. It's going to get deleted immediately. It's not going to stay within the deleted group blade for 30 days. So when you're creating a group, you've got different options. Aside the fact that you've been able to put in the group name, the description of the group, do you want to have owner added to the group, or is just member? Some of the people are confused as related to why do we need owners. Now, one of the reasons why you need to assign an owner to that specific group, I've actually restricted access of everyone. I do not want to give anyone group admin role, but I want this person even without the specific that permission that I've actually mentioned. I want that person to be able to manage that group. I want the person, to be able to maybe remove users, add users to the group after I've been able to create the group. So once you add anyone as owner to that specific group, that person, that identity, that user account will be able to manage the group. By managing the group, I'm talking about, managing the users within the group, removing users, adding users, deleting them, within that specific group. But users cannot manage the group, they don't have the permission. Only owners can actually have, that particular permission. Now, the membership type, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Now, I'm trying to add 2 people to this specific group. It's easy for me to just go in here and click on members. Even while I'm creating the group, you can also do this once the group has been created. Now here you can see users, groups, and I want to add user to this just 2 users. I'm picking this ADDS and I'm picking maybe Ademola. We're adding them to the group. Fine, because they are just 2. What if I'm trying to add 50,000 users to that group? Are you saying I should go in there and start searching them one after the other? There is 100% chance that I will miss 1 or 2 people out. There is always that chance that I will miss 1 or 2 people out. So what can I do in this case? I can create the group by dynamically, leveraging on the membership type. But I'm not able to, this is, grayed out because I do not have the permission. I do not have, not permission here, I do not have the license. To be able to leverage dynamic membership, you need at least premium P1 license to be assigned to your tenant. So you can play with it. You can take free license for 30 days just for you to, be able to do this. So when you go in there, what that does is it gives you that leverage. Let's see, I'm not sure I've got, even if it's not going to work again. So when you have the dynamic membership, you can set a rule to say if department of this person equals, to equals finance, then add them to the group. Do you understand? So that means you are saying everyone, while I'm creating the users, I'm adding departments. Anyone that have been added to the finance department, then they should be added to just the same way this specific one is actually talked about. These guys, when you create a group and you say IT lab administrator, but these guys have been added to their job title. The job title that has been added to each of these users is IT lab administrator. So that means I can actually use this to say if title equals IT lab administrator, then have them added to this group. So that's dynamically. Now, what this does is it pulls all the users, check the ones with the title IT lab administrator, and add them to the group. If there is a change of department for any of these guys, and the first guy, user 1, moves to finance and we change the title to finance, that user will be removed from this group. Imagine, we manually setting it up, 5,000 people, and someone moved from one department to another, then we need to start going to the group and check, who is the person, let's say they've even given us the name, then we need to go there to manually remove. It might even be after 30 days and this person is still in the group where it doesn't have to be. So you can play with this. And so nothing really is happening here. I've got like a video on YouTube where I've talked about this if you want to take a look at this. So let's go to the lab 2. The lab 2 talks about how do we manage subscriptions and outback. Yeah, so we've talked about identities, and we've talked about roles within Microsoft Entra Identity: global admin, user admin, application admin, even guest inviter, to be able to invite guests to our tenants. Here, we want to start talking about roles that are needed for you to be able to manage resources within your organization, not identities now. So we're not talking about the tenant now, we're talking about resources. Let's say I want to create a web app. I want to create virtual machines. I do not need a global admin like I've said the other time. I just need permissions that will let me create those resources. So here, what we are going to be looking at is from the tags here. You can see the tags one. They want us to look at the management group. I'm so sure you guys have not forgotten, though it's been a while now, where we talked about hierarchies in Azure. And I have told you that, the highest hierarchy is management group. Under management group is where you have subscriptions. Under subscription is where you have resource groups. Under resource groups is where you now have your resources. So if you want a specific user to be able to manage a specific resource, then you assign the role to that user on that resource itself. If you want that user to be able to manage all the resources within a particular resource group, then you assign a role to that user on that particular resource group. What if the user needs access to all the resource groups within that specific subscription? We do nothing else than to assign a role to that user or identity on that particular subscription. You work for an organization where the number of resources, the number of subscriptions they have is over 200. And you want a user to be able to manage all these subscriptions. What are we going to do? All we need to do is to assign a role to that specific user on the management group. We can have so many management groups, but there is a management group that has been created for us, which is the root management group. And one good thing about the root management group is, every object that you create in Azure, regardless of if it's a subscription, if it's a resource or it's an identity object, every object have got what we call the GUID, the GUID, object ID, or whatever you want to call it. There is an ID associated with that specific identity. There is an ID associated with that specific resource. So when you go to or even the groups, so when you go to users, you would see, yes, this user, Babafemi at IT360NG, which is fine, but that is not the identifier. There is always something that is used to identify that specific user, and that's what we call the object ID. Yeah, you can see this guy has got a GUID, GUID. Same thing goes with groups that you've created within the tenants. You've got an ID that is associated with that specific group. Same thing goes with the resources within that tenant. It might not be object ID for them, but we call it resource ID. So if I go to any of those resources that I've created within the tenant, just like this cloud lab that you can see here, this specific resource, this virtual machine, I've got its own ID. And how do I find that? If I go to properties, I need what we call, no, not properties here, sorry. Yeah, it should be. So I got, the resource ID. It might not be the same way, the object ID for identity within your tenant, but there is a specific ID that we use to identify that particular resource. So back to where we have your management group has also got an ID. And the funny thing is your root management group will have the same ID as your tenant ID, as your tenant. So your tenant ID and your root management group will have the same ID. So that's just have just know that. Then so we are looking at implementing management groups. How do we review and assign a built-in role? Why do we need what is called a built-in role? Is there any other different type of role? Yes. We've got roles that have been created by Microsoft based on what they feel, oh, this person needs to be able to manage virtual machines. Yeah, we can assign this person a virtual machine administrator. That's a role, which is fine. This person only needs to turn on the virtual machine and turn it off. Does that person still need a virtual machine administrator? No, they don't. They don't. But they need the specific role that will let them manage, that particular activity. Turning on virtual machine, turning off. Okay, a VM operator role, that should be enough. That should suffice. Yes, fine. We can do that. But me checking my VM operator role, and I'm seeing some other different permissions. I don't need that user to have, these permissions. I just need this user to be able to, turn off, turn on, what do you mean? So virtual machine, sorry. Maybe it wasn't expecting. Okay, so let's even say virtual machine user login. So it's a built-in. So when you create roles in Azure, you are going to see the description of that role, or when you review roles in Azure, let's put it that way, and you're going to see the type. If I go ahead to say, but before we even get there, and let's just look at this VM user login, and I want to see, the permissions. I'll click here, the view, and I can see the action, what this guy can do. But this is, so I start reviewing. Okay, it's able to read, which is fine. It just read. So it means if I assign this particular role to someone on the subscription level, this guy will be able to see all the virtual machine within that particular subscription. It's fine. Then I'm checking these one after the other, and I say, okay, I do not want this guy to be able to see virtual networks. Is that possible? Yeah, virtual machine. Or let's even leave it. But I don't want this guy to be able to see ARC machines within my tenant. Then I can go to this JSON and say, okay, this guy, yes, I'm good when it comes to the virtual machine. I'm good when it comes to the virtual network. Yeah, this guy should be able to see public IP addresses. But I don't want this guy to see anything related to Azure Arc. Then these permissions are not needed. I'll take this permission off. Do not forget that this user is, this reason for this permission is for this user to be able to log into virtual machine. Now, it needs what we call a data action. This action is on the resource. Is different from a data action. So a very good way to explain this is a storage account. When you create a storage account, permissions that you see within here, within this block, is for that user that has been assigned that permission to be able to perform on that resource. When it comes to the data that has been stored within that particular resource, will that user be able to, perform? And that's why you will see, I've seen people raise tickets to me saying, okay, I'm an administrator on a key vault, but I'm not able to read the secret within the key vault. Yes, you will not be able to, because you've only got permissions to manage that key vault. You don't have the permission, the action to be able to manage data within the key vault. So here I need actions. So when you see data action, it's talking about that specific resource, the data stored within that specific resource. Can that user or that identity manage that specific action? And that's what you're going to be doing there. That's what this data action means. So yeah, once you see anything action here, it's just talking about the overview, the resource itself. But what about the data stored within that specific, resource? Will that person be able to manage those data in there? So if the person is not assigned a role here, then it will still not be able to manage those resources. So you can have, administrator on the machine. So that means you can actually manage, delete, create, but it doesn't give you that permission to be able to manage data in there. So data action is always, you need this permission. So once you see anything like non-action, not action, it's talking about, okay, this person can do this, he can do this, he can do this, but I do not want this person to be able to read this. This might not be, for me, I can just remove it and it will not be able to perform this action. I can still copy this out and put it in here. Still, it will not be able to, but it doesn't really make any sense if I'm copying this out and I'm putting it there. If there is no need. If I just don't want this guy to be able to do this, I'll take it out. But where this actually works is, I'd say this person, I want to give this person everything when it comes to compute, when it comes to virtual machine. But I don't want this person to be able to delete machines. So what I will do is, let's see, we'll still go back to, so what I will do is, this guy, I would have something like this, microsoft.compute/virtual machine/asterisk. The asterisk means this person can do everything. This one will not be there, /asterisk. So, but I do not want this guy to be able to delete. So what I will now do is, I'll copy this one, put it in non-action, but instead of the /read, I will have it as /delete. That means this person can perform everything when it comes to virtual machine, but he cannot delete. In that case, this non-action should be, works well if you do that. Same thing as this data action. I want this person to be able to do anything related to, virtual machine here. The login, everything, but I do not want, maybe there are some specific action, data action I don't want this guy to be able to do. Yes, this person should be able to, or let me say I'm even adding start but I do not want this person to be able to stop something. I can actually have it as anything related to, the action I do not want this guy to do. That's what we go to, the not. So it all depends on if you want it specific to that resource, or specific to the data within the resource. And that's where the data action, the non-action, or not data action comes into play. So that's that. What again? How do we create a new? Yeah, this is how we create it. But let's see. So if I go back to again, you need specific permissions to be able to, even assign those roles or even create this. So for you to be able to create a custom role, you need to be assigned an owner role on that particular resource. It might be a resource group, or it might be a what's it again? A subscription, or it might be on a management group. But you cannot create a custom role on the resource itself. Though you can assign a custom role to that specific resource, but you cannot create it from it. So here I'm going to be creating on this subscription. That means you cannot scope a custom role specifically to a resource, but you can scope it to a resource group. You can scope it to you will see the scope I'm talking about. You can scope it to a management group. You can even scope it to a subscription, but you cannot scope it to a resource itself. So let's see. So the scope means where the subscription, that particular or that specific permission or group role that you've created, where it will be, it can be used. So let's wait. This is still loading. Oh my, come on. So while this is still loading, you can see once you go to this guy, it talks about the JSON. It talks about, okay, it's talking about the fact that we should look at, the owner role, the contributor role, and the reader, see the differences, also search for virtual machine contributor and see what are some of the roles, So let me show you before we, okay, let's see. Maybe I can create a new one first. Then we can come back to the owner and see the differences between a contributor and an owner role. A contributor can actually do almost everything someone assigned an owner role can do, but someone assigned a contributor role cannot assign a role to someone else or another identity on that resource. What's going on? This is taking all the time. Okay, I'll just continue. But whatever I've done, this guy just wants you to review those roles. So you can go in there, review the roles. The JSON was the one I was showing you the other time. Just play with it. Yeah, good. Now, this is how we create a new role. This is the JSON part of it. This is the assignable scope. These are the permissions. And so when you want to create a new role, do you want to start, do you have a JSON file you want to update? Let's say you've created a JSON file, like the other file I was looking at, I can download it, and just upload it. Or do you want to create this role from scratch? Or you have a role, this virtual machine login administrator, like the one I was showing you. I like it, but I want to change some things. So I'll just look for it and say virtual machine. Yeah, this is the one I like it, but I'm not sure I want to have that role. So I'll just say you can give your custom role any name and say virtual machine user login. I'll just put custom in front of it. So this is the role I want to clone. Put your description. This is a clone custom role. So because I'm actually leveraging the virtual machine login role, is going to give me all the actions in that particular. So you can see these are data actions. You can add them. It talks about data plane. It talks about the control plane. So any action you see here are for the control plane. Any action you see here are for the data plane, the white card. But if I want to add a new action, I can come here and say, I want to add a permission, and it looks for all the permissions depending on what where I want this guy to. But for me, it's the compute, so I don't need the other ones. I'm just going to look for the compute, which is this one, and I'm going to look for some actions within the compute that I can actually add to this particular role. This role makes sense, but it's just missing one or two things. I want this guy to be able to maybe let's say, let me just look for something, to be able to read diagnosis settings, settings within the log analytics. I want this guy to be able to read it, so I just add it here and say read. That's the only thing I need. Then if you want to exclude, you want to add some of those permissions, you do not want to give some of those permissions, you want to put them as non-action. The same way I've done that, if I click on this exclude permission and I look for any of those permissions, I just pick one of these things randomly, and I just add this. So what it's going to do is it's going to add it as non-action. For everything this guy can do, this guy should not be able to do this. I can also do the same for data plane and say non-data plane action. But for me, I don't really like it this way. If I know what I want to add, I'll just go to the JSON part of it. So like I said, as you can see, when you're creating a new role, you can download the already created one, which is the inbuilt one, and upload it if you select start from scratch. Yeah. So for me, I just come here and say no, I just want these. I will just edit this guy and say this guy should be able to do everything. It's fine by me. When it comes to hybrid, it should be able to do everything. Or let's say, yeah, it should be able to do everything. Come on, why did I remove that? So when you're actually working, you need to be sure. So, but I do not want this guy. The non-action should be, I don't want this one, but yeah, so I take this guy out. Then yeah, no, sorry, I take this because it's the only one, so I don't need that. Yeah, it should be able to do everything except delete. Then I save this guy. So if I go back to this permission here, you will see it should be able to do everything, but the non-action here is delete. But here, I've actually changed this guy. That means this guy can manage everything when it comes to virtual machine. You can create, you can read, you can do everything, but because of the non-action here, you will not be able to delete. So assignable scope was the one I was talking about. Because I'm creating this on the subscription, the assignable scope is subscription. I can add other assignable scope also, like management group, subscription, resource group. But like I said, you cannot assign a custom domain directly to a resource, but you can assign it to a management group, a subscription, or even resource group within that particular subscription. So that's for the assignable scope. I'm just going to discard this guy. So, oh my. So, but at least you can actually see, So let's review the other roles, that was talked about here, and I will show you the differences, between you having an owner role and the contributor. So I've got those two roles here, the owner role and the contributor role. So yeah. Why am I able to? Okay. I'm not able to. Okay, lovely. So this is the first one, which is the owner role. I just take you to the JSON, and you would see this for sure will be inherited from the management group itself, and that's why you can see the assignable scope is nothing. It tells you that this is assigned from the management group, so it can be assigned to any of those objects. Now you can see the actions here. Nothing is mentioned, nothing, except here you can just see you can see what's it again, you can see asterisk. That means this guy has got white card, and that's why people can come back to me and say, oh, owner, but I'm still not able to see secrets that I've stored within my keywords, because here even your owner doesn't have data action. So he can read everything when it comes to control plane, but he will not be able to read data. It will not be able to read data within the keyword. So if you want that same access, you can put an asterisk here. So that's for that. The same thing that we have here, you can see this is the one for owner. If you go back to what's it again, the contributor, you will see the difference. So let's just take it back to the contributor, and let's see what we're going to get. So I'll go back to this. I'll go back here, and just hold on. It takes a while, I don't know why. Yep, so the rows there, and I go back to the contributor itself. Then I click on view, same JSON. I go back to the JSON. Just hold on. I go to JSON. Then you can see we've got the same thing as the action, which is, you've got the asterisk, but we've got so many not action. Yes, this person, this role, I've got same action, just like the owner role on that specific scope, but here they've got a lot of non-actions when it comes to what the person cannot do. So what are some of the things? Authorization, delete, write. This person cannot create a new custom role. It cannot delete. It cannot elevate his access. Lot of things in there that the person will not be able to do. Even this person cannot, create a new subscription, or cancel a new subscription. So that's that for that. So the non-action, this is how we use it. We use when we have an asterisk and we just want to negate some things out. So you can take a look at all these and see how this relates to what we've been discussing. So I think I will stop it here, and we can continue from next class. I will just try to make sure that the next class will go a little bit faster than today, so that we can cover a lot of them. But try to replicate, try to go through the steps within each of these labs, and if you've got specific questions, just let me know. Any question before we call it a day? Which of the labs are you talking about? So that's the one for fundamental. We can take a look at that later. Yeah. All right. Have you guys tried to check my YouTube channel, to see how I did the labs? Or whatever were you getting? Because I know I've got all the labs for AZ900. Um, that's why, yeah. Yeah, so you'll still not be able to continue. Mm. But check before you come to me. Go ahead. This is why I have that playlist, right? So I've got a playlist for the Azure Fundamental Labs. Everything, everything you're looking at. Oh, really? There's a lot of VPN. I know. So you can see. So which one? Which of these ones? I can't hear you. Did I just lose them? Can anyone hear me there? I can't hear you guys. Okay. Can anyone say anything? Oh, still can't hear you. All right. We can call it a day. I would attend to you guys soon.